So let me start with this idea. And it's pretty simple, but I don't think we often consider it. And that's the concept that every challenge we face, whether it's one that we choose to embrace, we're going to run a marathon, we're going to learn a new language, we're going to salsa dance, or something that's thrust on us, the pandemic, something that we didn't choose, it's going to affect us in one of two ways. We aren't going to be the same after we face this challenge. And it's either going to slowly grind us down, tire us out, exhaust us, make us bitter, or, since we're Canadian, we've got to use the Celine Dion reference, it's going to be like the wind beneath our wings, right? It's going to lift us up. It's going to lighten us or our organization or our team. But we're not going to be the same. There's no middle path here. And the part that I think is important is we don't often consider perhaps what determines which of those two paths we go on. And in my experience in the wilderness, I feel a lot has to do with the fundamental strategy or attitude with which we approach these challenges, these difficulties, these hiccups, and whether we grind against them or we employ this thing called grit. Now, both of these are opaque terms, but grind we get, right? Grind's the hustle culture, it's the late nights, it's the skip meals, it's the going all in. We tend to venerate this, right? In modern corporate society, in modern Western society, I think, we lionize this. It's seen as a badge of achievement. All-nighters, hard-working. I think we even had hard work here, and no judgment against you. But we have to grind at times, right? We always do, but it's not a long-term success strategy. No matter how tough we are, we're going to run into enough problems at some point that we grind ourselves down. We all have a breaking point. Now, grit, on the other hand, I think is more opaque than grind even. We may have read about this in Angela Duckworth's book, may have heard Brene Brown talk about it, but I think it remains elusive, perhaps, to our society, ephemeral in a sense. But we've seen it, right? We've seen it in great teams. I don't really want to say this. We might not have seen it in the Oilers, but we've seen it in great organizations. The Leafs, I'm from Toronto originally, so I got to say that. I haven't won a cup in my lifetime. We've seen it in great teams. We've seen it in great organizations. We've seen it in friends and colleagues when they perform, face really incredible difficulties and huge challenges with a sense of ease. And I don't want to say that it's easy, but with a sense of grace, that they're almost doing what they were put on this earth to do. And I think this gives us our first hint at where grit lies. And it's less of a forced march, and it's a bit more of a flow state. It's a bit more of something that is joyful. This obviously a large part of lean is that idea of congealing the organization behind a guiding purpose. And I'm going to talk on that in a sec. But the first thing I want to say is one of the major challenges I think I see in the business world, if you will, or in the modern world, is that it's really easy to conflate purpose with winning. Now, winning's great, but we don't always win. So winning would be like, meeting sales objectives, meeting quarterly targets, meeting production targets, all these different things. That's great, but we're not always going to win. Purpose is something bigger. Winning's an outcome, but purpose is the origination. That's what starts. That's what gets us out of bed and has us leap out of bed instead of crawl out of bed. And so when I say that and people are like, well, what do you mean? I suggest think of your children. Think of your wife. Think of your partner, your colleagues, your best friends. They love you because you win, but they don't stop loving you. They're happy for you. They celebrate with you when you win, but they don't stop loving you when you don't because they love something bigger. They love this unique set of talents, sensitivities, empathies, compassions that makes you, each of us individually unique. And I think really that's where we need to start looking for purpose. And now you're like, great, this is like a big kumbaya session with the raft guide. So let me kind of ground this in a more, something we can put our fingers on. So when I graduated in engineering physics and told my mom and dad, hey, no one will hire me, so I'm going to go to the Yukon and guide rafts for the next 23 years. They were like, great, we've raised Spicoli. This was not our plan. But, I didn't look far off at the time, I'll have to admit. But the thing is, rafting's hard work, right? Rafting can be a real grind. People often last a season or two. This is a massive responsibility that's put on a young man or woman's shoulders, both emotional and physical. And it was on my very first trip in the Arctic. I was with an Alaskan group, Alaska Discoveries. It was a 12-day trip. On day 10, we reached an ice dam. We could not get around it. We got there about 3 in the afternoon, and we had to portage 8 tons of gear. So we took the rafts apart and started carrying the stuff around. It was well after midnight that we cooked dinner, and I was cleaning the dishes after that with the trip leader. And in Alaskan organizations, there's a real hierarchy. So like the trip leader is by law not allowed to know the name of like the lowest rafter. He just called me Canada. He didn't even know my name. So he's like, hey, Canada, you know what we're doing here? And I'm like, no, Joe. His name was Joe Willie Jones. He had this huge mustache and he looked like a trapper himself. We're scrubbing. I'm like, Joe, as soon as we've done the dishes, I got to go to bed. I'm exhausted. And Joe pointed down to the riverbank and he said, we're creating ambassadors for the North. And I think you can hear in my voice already how deeply I'd fallen in love with the Arctic. I mean, this was a landscape that mattered to me. I could sense the threat on its doorstep. And I'd like to think that Joe's simple words congealed something for me that not only brought me back for the next 23 years, but brought out the best in the face of flipped rafts and snowstorms and sand and salads and all those things. I knew what I was doing, and I knew it mattered to me. It didn't matter if it mattered to anyone else. And so the first thing I'll say is, we want to try and be Joe Willie Joneses for other people. We want to try to help them see why what they're doing matters. But that's more than just winning. That's more than just getting 2,000 folks down the river in the summer or whatever, not having any incidents. That was something that mattered. The second thing I want to say about, and this is going to kind of a little bit fly in the face of lean, so I just want you to think about this. Because and again, I'm no expert, but in everything I read about lean, it was this convergence of everyone getting behind the same central idea. And one of the challenges I see with so many groups and organizations is they have a vision statement or they have a mission statement, and it's for that year. And maybe they've got another one the next year, or they keep honing it down. And I can promise you, if I speak to 100 CEOs and we're having a pre-event discussion, I'm like, hey, what is your vision statement for this year? They're like, I'll get someone to send it to you. They don't even know. That doesn't get you out of bed in the morning, right? And so my point really is these things matter, but that's like an uncut gem, and we each have to find and polish our own facet on it. And I think caring is more important than all caring about the same thing. I think there's people in your team or your organization who might want to put a grandchild through higher education. There might be someone who wants to, go to Iceland for the first time or take their auntie hiking on the Camino, or maybe, they have a more direct connection to the vision or the mission. It doesn't matter. Caring's contagious, and when people care, that's when they stop grinding, and I think then those paths can start to converge. So I just leave that as a gentle thought that maybe it's not always critical initially to have everyone caring about the same thing. But I will say, caring is contagious, right? If you care about something, other people start to care too. And as leaders, I think our job is to, be bold enough. Be I don't want to say brave, because I'm not, but you're kind of taking that step, burning the bridge behind you, and you say, this is what I care about. This is what I'm going to try and do. This is why I do what I do every day. And it gives people the opportunity and the freedom to do that as well. But until we don't care, until we find the reason we care deeply, we will ultimately end up grinding. And I'm making light of this process of setting these just maybe goals, stretch goals, setting things just beyond your fingertips over and over and over and over. This idea of what I'll call deliberate practice. Of course, this is the foundation of opportunity, of growth, of excellence, is how we become who we are. But we never see this. This lives for some reason in the shadows. I was talking to Corey when he drove me in today, and I was like, I can't remember what we were talking about, I said people just assume, we're talking about speaking. I was like, you think people just assume you're either good at something or you're not. Anyone who you see do something well has practiced at it. Anything you do well, you have practiced that. We are not born good. We have different talents, but what separates is the amount of time. We relegate this now to high school. We think practice was for the band. Practice was for hoops or football or something like that. We don't see this in great teams. We don't see it in great leaders. Think of the Olympics. We see the event every 4 years. We don't see the 364 days in between. We don't see the 12 years leading up to it because practice is boring. It's humbling. It's humiliating. It's embarrassing. It's awkward. It can be heartbreaking and frustrating. But every incredible achievement we've ever witnessed is simply an aggregation of these little steps. Maybe I could do a little more. Maybe I could do a little more. And I know a big part, or I suspect a big part of the lean process is this idea, not necessarily of continual improvement, but of empowering our teams and employees to figure things out on their own, to solve problems on their own. And this is really part of what practice is, but this is the part of figuring out when we're the problem, when we could be more, because sometimes we are part of the problem. I think this is crucial for purpose, because if the way we reward our employees is to give them money and benefits, and we're trying to provide them joy, as Richard talked about, the deepest joy, the most meaningful thing for all of us is when we become more than when we were, when we grow, when we see ourselves doing something, tomorrow that we couldn't do yesterday. That matters. That really is what fuels people caring about things. So finding a way to allow this within teams, I think, is critical. It requires some vulnerability. It requires us to be able to say, hey, I'm not great at that. I think I could be better, and not having the team scoff at you, but having the team say, perfect, how can we facilitate this? And this is really the start of the story, right? Everything up to this point has just been to get us in the game, just to get us competitive, just to get us to the start line. But what got us there? We had an idea that we cared about. We cared about it enough that we were willing to try and get better, willing to try and do things that we couldn't do at that time. It may have seemed impossible. And we were willing to do the little things, the right things, day after day after day, even when other stuff and distractions got in the way. To me, that's grit. Grit isn't about being super tough. Grit isn't about how strong you can push or how long you can go. It's about caring about something enough you're willing to try and get better and do the right thing for an extended period of time. And in talking to Ian, to me, that seems like that's a big part of lean too. I don't know if that's a personal part of a lean organization or a lean team, but it seems very applicable.